Excellent, thank you. That was quite a list. so lovely to be here today. I'm going to pick up on the discussion on partnerships, which is the theme for today. But I particularly wanted to talk about partnerships between organisations that are running trials. So clinical trials units, that's the parlance we predominantly use in the UK. You talk about your clinical research facilities here in Ireland. And part of that is because I think a lot of innovation and methods work needs to get into practice. And how we think about how we work together to make sure that we are using the evidence produced, and also how we innovate with new study designs is a really, really important part of our ecosystem. So that was why I picked what I wanted to talk about today. So just a few disclaimers of what I'm talking about. So these are some of my various roles, and they have informed my perspective, but I'm not actually representing the views of any of those people or employers on the right-hand side. And I can be a little contrary by nature at times, apparently. So in terms of the clinical trials units in the UK, if I just sum up who we are, so this gives you the map of all the clinical trials units in the UK. There's 51 of them. We have a formal registration process that was designed and implemented in 2007 in order to ensure that everyone meets a quality threshold. And you can see that there's a list of some of the things that people have to evidence that they've got that are not dependent on project funding, and that they can be robust and reliable in pushing those things forward. And that's all been written up, and the reference is there if you're interested in it. So we've got this network of CTUs, but they have a habit, or had a habit, of working very individually. So a core part of what we've been trying to do is think about how we can all come together. So if I think about what a CTU is now in the UK, and I'd invite those of you who work in CRFs to think about whether you're getting there in Ireland, I think we've really emerged over that time period to be a voice for trials. A focus for quality improvement, which is why I think the link into trial methodology is really, really important, and a quality standard, that it is recognised by funders that the CTU network provides a quality. I've put the bits in italics that might be less what people hoped to achieve. So I think we have challenged perceived authorities within trials to a degree. And I also think we've become an international movement, and hence the links to Ireland and other places, Australia, the US, Canada, across the world. Clinical trials units get the same things thrown at them and the same criticisms that actually get thrown at randomised controlled trials. They're too expensive, they're too slow, they take too long to do, surely we can have a better way to produce evidence faster, we're not innovative enough, and then in the UK, trials units get told they're too picky because they don't do everything that someone wants them to. But I think a lot of the big challenges for us are actually the same ones that team science has. So I don't know how much you were talking about the team science challenges and the fact that we need to think about research as a team endeavour with core cogs in the machine that we all deliver, and that includes trial methodologists and those pushing forward the way we do trials. But some of the things that we find challenging are whether someone's defined as an independent researcher, if they happen to be doing innovative methodological stuff but embedded in a current clinical study, whether someone's even classified as a researcher, if they're doing major innovations in systems, software and IT delivery. Does that make them a researcher? I think it does. But we have all these embedded concepts of what things are. And we do have a long-standing dominance of the sense of the chief investigator being the most important person for a trial. And that kind of eclipses the fact that everybody is essential in that group, and that includes the patient partners who are involved in delivering that study. So this kind of democratization and recognizing what we do as teams is really, really important. So I just wanted to pick up on kind of 3 approaches that I think are happening currently for how we drive forward innovation and implementation of that innovation in new approaches. So we work closely, we're members of the UKCRC registered clinical trials units, we're partners with the Trial Methodology Research Partnership and the UK Trial Managers Network. Obviously HRB is a partner in the TMRP as well. But I think sometimes when you've got these separate logos, you can get tricked into believing they're different constituencies. And actually, certainly if we take, for example, the trial conduct research group of the TMRP, probably 60 to 70% of the membership of that are actively people employed in trials units who are delivering trials on the ground. So this gives us a huge potential to think about how we both do methods research and get it into practice. So I'm going to just run through an example in each of 3 areas. One of those is about how we can work together on new types of trials to kind of spread the risk and the challenge and the grey hairs. One is about capacity development, and then one is about how we both develop and implement evidence in parallel and the kind of mechanisms we can use for doing that. So the first example I'm going to talk through is one about trials units working together. So we heard about a COVID trial earlier today. I'm going to talk about the panoramic trial. So this is the community-based equivalent of recovery. So this is a drug trial, novel antivirals in the community for people with COVID to see if we can prevent hospitalisation and death. This actually involved 3 trials units working together in order to deliver it. It was led very ably by the Primary Care Clinical Trials Unit in Oxford, all of safety and coverage of safety, but also thinking about safety and how we might deal with some of the excluded groups in safety, like pregnant women and all those sorts of things, was led by the Oxford Respiratory Trials Unit. And then I led from the Centre for Trials Research with a particular focus on how we brought in all 3 of the devolved nations and their slightly different health systems to make sure that we were recruiting appropriately across them. And then we all worked together on the headache of doing a large urgent COVID study, which I'm sure lots of you have experience of. So why was this a study that needed a bit of risk sharing and a bit of working together? It was a platform trial. We've seen those described already. We were starting with 1 drug, but we knew that we'd have second drugs and maybe third drugs to come in online. And everyone was essentially being randomized to whatever the available drug was or to usual care. So there's no placebo in this one. So that in itself was slightly novel for a primary care or community-based trial. Platforms have been less done in those areas. But actually, the key for us was the service delivery model and the study delivery model that was quite different. So with a focus on the inverse research participation law, which is that those most likely to benefit and least likely to take part, we basically did, the parlance of earlier was a decentralized trial. We basically decided that the patients would link directly to the trial and we would deliver back out to them. So people could self-refer themselves in if they thought they had COVID. We could reach directly out to them. So we managed to get approvals in all 4 nations. I'll just double checking on that because the approvals are different in all 4 nations. We managed to get approvals in all 4 nations to directly contact people who registered a positive test online. All of the registration, pre-screening and informed consent were online. We couriered medication to people's homes. So even if they were 7 kilometres down a farm track, they would get a courier delivering it, and that covered the whole of the UK, including the Highland and Islands. And everything else that they needed was delivered to them in their own home. We then followed them up predominantly with an electronic diary, but everyone had a choice of telephone, and everyone got at least 1 phone call from a clinician. So this study, we had some milestones on COVID studies. Everything had to be done fast. We were awarded funding we were told we were awarded funding from the 1st of October. We recruited the first and randomised the first participant to molnupiravir on the 8th of December 2021. We brought in our second drug on the 21st of April. And on the 27th of April, we stopped recruitment to molnupiravir, at which point we had recruited and randomised over 25,000 people into that evaluation. So that does make it the fastest drug trial recruitment in the UK at that point, certainly. In terms of our ability to spread risk, I talked about each trials unit took the lead on different things. But we were also able to do things because we'd already worked through how we were working together, like Oxford had someone off sick. I moved a senior trial manager over to be full-time working on amendments. So they were working full-time on amendments with the sponsor in Oxford, which just wouldn't usually happen elsewhere. So we were also able to kind of cover the bases of just keeping things going as we worked through. And just to add in that decentralised, we did also have this virology subsample, so people were self-sampling blood at home and returning it. So some people had extra kits sent to them at home to come through. And we closed that recruitment at the end of April. By the autumn, we were providing confidential results to the UK government to decide what they would do in terms of implementing molnupiravir for that next season, and the results were published in December of that year. So it was just 12 months from opening recruitment to publishing the results in the Lancet. So just to pick up on some of the things I said, I was particularly leading on how we got devolved nations to work. And one of the things we did was in Wales, Ireland and Scotland, Northern Ireland and Scotland, we did not go with a standard site model. So in Wales, we designed this to be all of Wales as a single site in the parlance of research. We had a single GP as the principal investigator for every single patient in Wales. We chose our public health body to be the NHS responsible organisation because they cover all of Wales, and we carefully set this in the NHS Wales symptomatic pathway for COVID, which meant that we could direct people back to clinical services if they were too high risk, but also it was well communicated by Welsh Government through everyone that this was part of clinical care, was the research study. Northern Ireland managed to model our design of a single site for Northern Ireland and managed to run that through. Scotland tried and ended up with a health board level model that took a little bit longer to set up because of the multiple areas. So in general, when we look at the inclusivity, which was a big focus for us on this, for Wales, where we have a lot of rural areas that are often completely denuded of any opportunity to get involved in research, we were balanced and patterned across where COVID was happening. So, and that includes the fact that our worst COVID rates were in socioeconomically deprived areas. We had most recruitment in those areas. So we managed to really succeed in a lot of our domains of inclusivity and geography around that. So that's just an example of how you can work together rather than having to say, well, we do everything just us, and we're actually in competition with another trials unit down the road. And from my perspective, I think we all learnt a lot from each other, and then we're all changing what we do going forward. So that's kind of a innovation in practice example. The other way that we can think about capacity development is with a clear mentoring approach and giving exposure and opportunities to others to see what people are doing in different places. We are not all the same. There is huge variety in what CRFs and CTUs are and do and focus on and are passionate about, and the learning that they've brought together. So these are just two examples. We have two mentoring programs that have kicked off in 2023. One is joint with the HRB, which there's 9 people, I think, have just started on. This is for active staff working in trials around Ireland, and they're being mentored from staff in Wales to give a broader experience of being able to observe a different range of studies, particularly around governance knowledge, but we're flexible enough to cover that to other things if they need to. We've also provided a similar scheme for anyone in Wales who's interested, who works in relation to research and development. They could work in the NHS, they could work in a private company, they could work anywhere, and they can be attached to a CTU, and we work with the 3 CTUs in Wales. They can be attached to a CTU for a time period with an individual mentor to help them learn about trials and kind of see inside the black box of a trials unit, not just a trial. In order to deliver those, we've developed a bespoke mentoring program so that everybody who's being a mentor is well trained and therefore works through. So I think this is another mechanism by which we can share expertise and knowledge, and hopefully become a mechanism by which we can then implement trial methods work and work that's been done. The final one I want to mention is an example that actually has been done within the Trial Conduct Working Group within the TMRP, which was led by Sharon Love from the MRC CTU Trials Unit. So this was a piece of work to go, what's the purpose of clinical trial monitoring? So it's a published paper, if you wanted to go and look at it. And essentially this was work where a team went through all of the different guidance from America, the EU, across the UK, of what it said you should be doing and why was clinical trial monitoring done. So you can just see a couple of the examples there of some of the language in some of those guidance documents. But this is an area that actually is a huge amount of work. And a lot of people design monitoring programs because they believe they have to keep safe with the regulator. So the purpose was to go, what do they really think is what we need to do? This came down to being distilled basically into 5 key principles, and those were transferred into lay terms. And these are the 5 things that we should be trying to do when we're designing a clinical trial monitoring schedule. And a lot of us do that all the time, and then often are going out to sites and going, why am I here? I'm checking their records, what am I doing? These are the 5 reasons that we need to be doing that. And therefore, this gives us a strong impetus to be able to go, we will design our purpose in this way. It is worth noting that a lot of the available evidence, it combines the concepts of error detection and quality improvement. So that's the other thing that I think is really, really important to remember when looking at designing a clinical trial monitoring plan for your trial, and does vary by the type of trial. So in parallel to this, and this is the part of the bit where having joint membership is good between organisations, Sharon's also been leading a group within the CTU network that looks at monitoring. And what that has done has it completely in parallel. We now have training materials on how to design monitoring, how to design site monitoring. We have guidance documents and papers looking at how we do it across a trials unit and how it can be improved. And I do think that trying to tie these things together to go, right, this is what we've shown from our trial methods work, and this is how we're going to then get it into practice and give people the tools they need to be able to do their jobs better and more efficiently, is really essential for us to think about implementation of the work that everybody's doing. So I'm getting towards the later bit. Sorry, I'm getting a nod on time. So what does this mean for all CTUs and CRFs? So I think we need to really recognise that we can learn by collaborating with other CTUs on major studies. I think there's a real strength in it. I think historically there's obviously been a bit of, sometimes we're competing against each other when we bid for grants and all of those sorts of things, and there's a little bit of a looking at each other and going, well, I'm sure our way's better than your way, really. And basically I think we need to grow up and get over that. If someone's doing something differently, it's a chance for us to learn. It's a chance for us to understand why they're doing it differently and what their drivers were. Okay. I think we need to provide and use evidence for what we do, and that's in practice. So I'm talking about it from a community of practice. So what you're doing helps us, but also we need to be prepared to justify the choices we make. I think we need to recognise that what we do is team science, and that matters for how we develop and reward staff. And I think certainly the challenges we have actually for people doing trial methodology research, as much as we have for people designing trials, is that actually there's a lack of recognition in a lot of areas, and we need to be able to work on that. We need to maintain our flexibility and to work in partnership with basically whoever wants to work with us. But I do think that we should also be challenging regulation. I think having distilled the clinical trial monitoring example down to those 5 principles, that actually gives us an opportunity to go back to regulators and say, these are the 5 principles. Why are you telling us we should do X, Y, Z when you inspect? Because actually that doesn't add value under these principles. And I think we should be brave enough and courageous enough to have this voice. Now, I gave this title a while ago, and in the meantime, my colleague Katie Gillies over there from Aberdeen has actually been doing a project where she's actually gone to find out how methods work gets into practice. So these are 3 mechanisms that I think we've currently got and that we're currently using to try and get things into practice. But I'd like you to watch the space for Katie's paper, which will be out imminently, on the TRIP study, which is directly looking at how we change practice with methods research. And I think that's really essential if we're going to gain all the benefits that we know really are there from methods research. So I'm going to stop there and just say diolch yn fawr.